The library has always been my escape. A place where silence is more than absence of sound, it's a language of its own. That night, I remember pushing through the tall glass doors just before closing hours. The city outside was buzzing, restless, but here the world seemed suspended in a soft hush. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and time-worn paper, and the light from the old brass lamps bathed every surface in a mellow, golden glow. I walked slowly between the tall shelves, fingertips grazing the spines of books like old friends. And then, I saw her. She was standing on the far side of the reading hall, sliding a heavy volume back into its place on the top shelf. She wore a dark, elegant cardigan over a pale blouse, and the way she moved, measured, unhurried, made the moment feel almost ceremonial. Her hair, dark with threads of silver catching the lamplight, was swept loosely back, and for some reason I couldn't look away. Our eyes met by chance, or maybe not by chance at all. Hers lingered on me just a moment too long, curious but guarded. I should have looked down, gone back to pretending I was here only for the books. Instead, I held her gaze until she gave the smallest smile, barely there, but enough to warm the still air between us. I found a book I didn't really care for and carried it toward the desk, if only for the excuse to be near her. She was arranging a stack of returns when I approached. My hand moved to set the book down, and at that exact second, hers reached forward. Our fingers brushed, not even fully, just the lightest contact, but it startled me more than it should have. Warmth shot through me, sudden and uninvited. She glanced up quickly, her lips curving into something halfway between amusement and warning. And then, in the softest voice, she whispered, "Shhh." It wasn't stern. It wasn't scolding. It was playful, as though she had caught me breaking some unspoken rule neither of us had named yet. Her eyes flickered with a secret I wasn't supposed to know, but now I desperately wanted to. For a moment, the silence around us wasn't empty, it was charged, alive. I could hear the faint squeak of the rolling ladder across the floor, the hum of an old ceiling fan turning overhead, even the thud of my own heartbeat in my chest. Everything was sharper, more vivid, because of her. I stepped back, gave her space, but the imprint of that whisper clung to me. It wasn't just a sound, it was an invitation. A promise that within this temple of quiet, something unspoken was waiting to unfold. I left the library that night carrying nothing but the memory of her eyes, her voice, and that one word that echoed inside me long after the doors had closed, "Shhh." The next afternoon, I told myself I was going back to the library to study. That was the lie I tried to believe. The truth was simpler, and harder to admit. I wanted to see her again. When I walked in, the air felt the same as always, still, cool, and filled with that faint mixture of old pages and polished wood. Yet there was something different, as if the silence already carried the echo of her whisper from the night before. She was there. Behind the circulation desk at first, then moving among the shelves with a stack of books in her arms. Her presence shifted the entire atmosphere. The way her heels clicked softly on the marble floor was enough to draw my eyes again and again. I sat at a table near the window, opening a book I barely read. Instead, I found myself watching her reflection in the glass. Each time she passed, her blouse brushed against the edges of bookshelves, her hair catching faint threads of light. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze slid in my direction too curious, almost questioning. It became a quiet dance of stolen glances. I'd lower my eyes to a page, only to feel her glance like a soft weight across the room. Then, when I dared look up, she would already be turned, feigning focus on the shelves. Neither of us said a word, but every pause, every silence, spoke louder than conversation. At one point, she approached my table, carrying several returns. She leaned slightly as she placed them down, her sleeve brushing the edge of my arm. The faint trace of her perfume, something warm, subtle, with a hint of sandalwood, reached me before her voice did. "You've chosen quite the pile," she said softly, her tone gentle, amused. I smiled, though I hadn't chosen much at all. I like pretending I'll read more than I actually do. Her lips curved, that quiet smile again. She tapped the top book with her finger, and in that small gesture, her knuckles grazed my wrist, light, accidental, yet deliberate enough to leave a pulse of warmth beneath my skin. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact lingered, just long enough to blur the line between accident and intention. "Books can be patient," she murmured, withdrawing her hand at last. They wait for us to be ready. Her words weren't just about the books. I felt it in the way she looked at me before moving on, her eyes lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in that same unspoken rhythm. Glances across the room, the brush of her presence near mine, the sense that something delicate was being stitched together between us silently, without acknowledgement. By the time I left, the sun was low, painting the library in shades of amber. I hadn't studied a single page. But I carried with me something more dangerous, more thrilling, the awareness that she was watching me too. The library always felt like a sanctuary, but that evening it became something else, an intimate corner of the world where silence wasn't enough anymore. I arrived late, the kind of late when only a handful of students lingered, heads bowed under the amber glow of desk lamps. Outside, the city hummed faintly, but here, the only sounds were the soft rustle of pages and the occasional creak of floorboards. She was at the main desk, carefully arranging a display of returned books. When she looked up and saw me, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, as though she had half expected me to come. This time, I didn't hide behind my books. I walked toward her. She met me halfway, her voice low, as though it might disturb the walls to hear us. "You're here again," she said, the words carrying more curiosity than reprimand. "Maybe I've started to like the silence," I replied. Then, before I could stop myself, I added, "Or maybe it's not just the silence." Her lips pressed together in a smile that was both shy and knowing. She gestured toward a quiet table tucked into the corner, and without words, we drifted there together. We sat across from each other, the table wide enough for books but narrow enough that her presence filled the space between us. The brass lamp above us painted her features in soft gold, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the graceful curve of her cheek, the steadiness of her gaze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I traced the edge of my notebook with my fingertip, trying to quiet the nervous energy inside me. She broke the silence first. "This place has been my second home for years," she said, her voice low, thoughtful. "I love it. But sometimes, it feels like I'm the only one listening to its silence." There was a vulnerability in her tone, quiet and almost hidden, as though she hadn't meant to reveal it. "I get that," I said softly. "Books kept me company when people couldn't. They don't ask questions, they just wait until you're ready." She tilted her head, studying me in a way that felt less like observation and more like recognition. Slowly, she reached across the table, resting her fingers lightly on the corner of my notebook. It was nothing, just a touch to an object, but it was close enough that her skin brushed mine. The contact was small, fleeting, but it sent a current through me. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with something more dangerous, the desire for more. Her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. In them, I saw a mixture of curiosity, hesitation, and a spark of something she wasn't ready to name. We didn't need to. In that hushed corner of the library, surrounded by shelves that had seen centuries of stories, it felt like we had begun to write our own quietly, secretly, and meant for no one else. The storm came without warning. One moment, the night outside the tall library windows was calm, the city lights twinkling like scattered jewels. The next, rain lashed against the glass in sharp bursts, thunder rolling low across the sky. The lights inside flickered once, then steadied, leaving the great room dimmer than usual. Shadows stretched long between the shelves, and the air felt charged, like the storm had slipped inside with us. I was seated at the corner table, a pile of books open before me but mostly forgotten. She appeared from behind the shelves, a single lamp in her hand, its glow soft and golden against her features. She set it down on the table between us, as if it were a candle marking the center of something unspoken. "The wiring in this place is older than me," she said quietly, glancing upward at the buzzing ceiling lights. "Storms make the building restless." Her voice was calm, but her nearness unsettled me in a way no storm could. She pulled out the chair beside mine instead of across, sitting close enough that her shoulder brushed against mine when she leaned forward. The contact was small, accidental maybe, but it made my breath catch. She opened one of the books between us. Her fingers traced the lines of text with surprising gentleness, like she was caressing a memory rather than a page. Then she began to read aloud, her voice low, hushed, intimate. The passage spoke of longing, two people separated by silence, yearning for words neither could speak. The way she read it made the air heavy, each word carrying a weight far beyond the paper. When she stopped, the rain filled the pause, pattering hard against the glass. I found myself leaning closer, my voice instinctively dropping to match hers. It almost sounds like it was written for right now. She turned her head slowly toward me. Our faces were close, so close I could see the faintest trace of silver in her dark lashes, the soft curve of her lips pressed together in a line that wasn't quite a smile. "I shouldn't be sitting here," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "And yet, you are." The words left my mouth before I could catch them. Her breath left her in a quiet laugh, but her eyes stayed on mine, unwavering. The moment stretched, suspended, fragile, like the library itself was holding its breath. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she lifted her hand. Her fingertips brushed lightly against my temple as she tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was simple, tender, but her fingers lingered a heartbeat too long, tracing the edge of my cheek before falling away. I didn't move. I couldn't. The storm rattled the windows again, thunder echoing through the walls, but the only sound that mattered was the quiet rhythm of her breathing beside me. That night, sitting in the golden hush of the lamp, we didn't kiss, didn't cross the line fully. But something inside us shifted. The rules we'd both held on to were already bending, trembling like the windows in the storm. And I knew, so did she, that the silence between us would never be the same. The next evening, the rain was gone, but its memory clung to the streets in the form of damp cobblestones and the faint scent of earth. The library felt different when I stepped inside, quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something. She was behind the desk when I entered, her cardigan draped over her shoulders, a book half open in her hands. When she saw me, she closed it slowly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if last night had been a dream, a storm-born illusion. But then, her eyes softened, and I knew she remembered it too. I wandered between the shelves, pretending again to look for something to read. When I finally reached the back corner, I heard the faint sound of a lock turning. The metallic click echoed louder than it should have in the silence. I turned. She was standing at the front door, keys in hand, her gaze steady. "No one comes at this hour," she said, almost casually. Her tone carried more weight than the words themselves. The truth in her voice sent a ripple through me. She wasn't talking about patrons. She was talking about rules, about expectations, about the invisible lines she had been drawing between us since the first whisper of shh. And now, with that lock, she had erased them. She walked back slowly, her heels tapping against the marble, the sound measured, deliberate. When she reached me, she didn't sit across the table this time. She placed her palm on the smooth wooden surface, leaning slightly closer. "You know I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. Her voice carried no librarian's authority now, only the fragile honesty of a woman stepping past her own boundaries. I could have pulled away, could have given her the out she was offering. But instead, I let my hand rest on the table too, sliding closer until our fingertips touched. The contact was feather light, yet it felt like the center of the world shifted. Her breath caught, just barely, but enough for me to hear it. "I keep telling myself I'm too old for," she trailed off, shaking her head, her lips pressing together as if the words themselves were dangerous. I leaned in, my voice low, steady. "Maybe it's not about age. Maybe it's just about finding someone who makes the silence feel less empty." Her eyes closed for a moment, as though she needed to steady herself. When they opened again, there was no hesitation left. She turned her hand over, sliding her palm firmly against mine, fingers threading together with quiet certainty. The warmth of her touch spread through me, grounding and electrifying at once. She gave me a small, almost mischievous smile, and then, with a soft exhale, she whispered, "Shh, don't say a word." It wasn't a reprimand this time. It was a vow. A signal that what we were sharing no longer belonged to the rules outside these walls. And for the first time, the library didn't feel like a place of silence, it felt like a secret, one we had chosen to keep together. The library had never felt so alive in its quiet. With the doors locked and the lamps casting soft pools of golden light, it was as though the whole building had exhaled, releasing us from its usual restraint. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full, charged, like it belonged only to us. She led me deeper into the stacks, away from the main hall, her hand brushing mine now and then as though testing whether I'd pull back. I didn't. Every small touch carried more meaning than words could hold. We stopped in an alcove where the shelves curved inward, forming a kind of hidden corner. She lowered herself to the carpeted floor with surprising ease, her back resting against the spines of a row of encyclopedias. She patted the space beside her without a word, and I joined her, sitting close enough that the warmth of her arms seeped into mine. For a while, we said nothing. We simply listened to the hum of the building, the faint ticking of a distant clock, the soft rhythm of our breathing. Then she picked up a book she'd brought with her, flipping to a page she seemed to know by heart. "Read to me," she said, handing it over. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, as though asking me to carry something she couldn't. I took the book, my fingers brushing hers. Clearing my throat softly, I began to read. My voice sounded louder in the stillness, yet she leaned in as though afraid to miss a single word. I could feel her listening, not just to the story but to me, the cadence of my voice, the pauses, the parts where emotion caught in my throat. At some point, she closed her eyes and rested her head lightly against my shoulder. The weight was gentle, yet it anchored me, grounding me in the moment. I didn't dare move, afraid she might lift her head if I did. The scent of her hair, warm, clean, with a trace of something floral, drifted around me, settling into memory. I kept reading until the words blurred, until the story itself faded behind the quiet intimacy of her presence. The book slid from my lap, forgotten. Slowly, almost without thinking, I curved my arm around her shoulders. My hand rested against her upper arm, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. For a heartbeat, I worried I'd gone too far. But then, with the smallest shift, she leaned closer, settling into me fully. Her fingers brushed my knee, light as a question, and when I didn't move away, they stayed. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us had become something deeper, a language of its own. The world outside the library didn't exist. There was only the warmth of her body against mine, the faint rustle of pages when a stray draft stirred the shelves, and the undeniable truth that something fragile and extraordinary was unfolding in the hush of that hidden corner. That night, we didn't break the silence. We made it ours. I don't remember when my eyes grew heavy, or when the stillness of the library shifted from sharp with tension to soft with comfort. All I knew was that at some point, the darkness outside had begun to fade. The tall windows at the far end of the hall glowed faintly, the first touch of dawn filtering in. She stirred beside me, her shoulder brushing against mine as she straightened. For a moment, I thought she might regret it, that she would rise, gather herself, and return to the woman who lived by rules and silence. But when she turned to me, her expression wasn't guarded. It was tender. "Have you noticed?" she whispered, her voice still husky from the quiet hours. "We've sat here all night, and it feels like only a moment has passed." I nodded, though words felt too clumsy for the weight of what had happened. My hand was still resting over hers from the night before, and though I half expected her to withdraw, she didn't. Instead, her fingers tightened slightly, deliberate, as if she was choosing to hold on. Light spilled across the floor in soft golden lines, climbing the shelves one by one, illuminating the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. In the hush of dawn, the library looked different, not just a place of rules and restraint, but a sanctuary that had borne witness to something rare, something secret. She studied me in the quiet, her eyes searching. "Rules exist for a reason," she murmured, almost as if reminding herself. But maybe, her lips curved into a faint smile. Maybe some rules are meant to bend when hearts are involved. The vulnerability in her voice struck me. She wasn't just talking about librarians and patrons. She was confessing something larger, her fear of being seen, of stepping outside the careful lines of her life. I didn't rush to answer. I simply lifted her hand to my chest, pressing it lightly against the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. "Then let's bend them," I said softly. Her eyes softened at that, and for a moment, the silence felt like a promise sealed between us. She leaned closer, brushing her lips against my cheek, not hurried, not bold, but lingering. The warmth of her mouth stayed long after she drew back, leaving me breathless in its wake. As she pulled away, she smiled with that same mix of mischief and tenderness I had seen the first night. "Shoo," she whispered, but this time it wasn't a command. It was a secret, a vow, a way of making what had happened between us sacred. The city outside was waking, its hum beginning to creep back into the world. But inside the library, wrapped in the golden hush of morning, it felt as though time still belonged to us. And as I finally rose to leave, her hand slipped into mine with quiet certainty. I knew then that the silence we had shared wasn't an ending. It was a beginning written not in words, but in whispers.